February 23rd, 1943. Telefunken Headquarters, Berlin. The magnifying glass quivered in Obstatel Runger's hand as he studied the copper component recovered from an air crash 3 weeks earlier. In his restricted technical notes, he wrote that what he was seeing felt impossible. No one should have been able to compress such power into a device so small. Outside the laboratory windows, smoke drifted upward from damaged factories across the city, a daily reminder of Allied control of the skies. Yet on his bench sat a different warning. Its presence showed that the technological gap was far wider than anything senior German officers had been willing to acknowledge. The item in front of him, taken from a British Sterling bomber that crashed near Rotterdam on the night of February 2nd, measured only about 10 centimeters across. This was the CavityMagnetron, the British microwave generator that produced radar emissions at frequencies Germany could not counter. Its compact form concealed a level of engineering that was both efficient and far beyond anything German teams had constructed. Neither Runger nor his fellow specialists realized that this single copper piece would soon clarify a mystery that had been draining Grand Admiral Karl Donitz's submarine force at a disastrous rate. Losing roughly 40 U-boats every month was an unsustainable blow to Germany's Atlantic campaign. The causes of those losses were being shaped not by naval maneuvers, but by electromagnetic signals that German detection equipment failed to register. That shift in understanding began to take shape. On the cold morning when the British aircraft fell near Rotterdam, local resistance observers watched German troops sealing off the wreck with unusual speed. The Sterling, serial number R9000, 264 from 7 Squadron RAF, had been returning from only its second mission when anti-aircraft fire ripped through its left wing. All 7 crewmen died on impact. Their loss was profound, yet the equipment they carried would contribute more to the Allied effort than they could have foreseen. The bomber held Britain's newest device, the H-2S ground mapping radar, built to help crews locate targets through cloud and darkness. At the center of that system was the CavityMagnetron, a breakthrough so significant that Winston Churchill had struggled with the risks of using it in combat, concerned about exactly the kind of capture that had now occurred. The aircraft had taken part in a strike on Cologne, following the first operational use of H-2S against Hamburg just days earlier on January 30th. 1943. General der Luftnachrichten Wolfgang Martini, the Luftwaffe officer responsible for signals intelligence and one of Germany's foremost radar authorities, received notice of the crash within hours. Martini, who oversaw all radar development and communications for the Luftwaffe, immediately understood that the downed bomber might reveal answers to problems that had troubled German commands for months. His position placed him at the center of Germany's radar network, and he recognized at once that the technology recovered near Rotterdam could reshape everything they believed about British capabilities. Martini sent his most capable technical personnel to examine the crash site. Their first survey confirmed both his deepest concerns and his strongest expectations. Inside the lower fuselage of the bomber, they found equipment unlike anything German crews had previously recovered. The rotating antenna unit, the cathode ray display, and the advanced power circuitry all indicated a radar system operating on concepts German scientists had discussed in theory, but had viewed as unworkable for regular service. When the team removed the transmitter assembly from the wreckage and studied the component that powered the entire system, they discovered something that challenged the limits of German engineering knowledge. The magnetron, identified as British model CV-64, was built from a solid copper cylinder measuring about 8 centimeters wide and 12 centimeters long. 8 carefully machined cavities were arranged evenly around a central cathode, with strong permanent magnets positioned around the assembly. Its design appeared straightforward, yet early tests showed that it produced significant microwave output at frequencies German devices could not generate or detect in a dependable way. Martini ordered the component taken to Berlin at once, under armed escort. In his view, this single discovery could shed light on why Donitz's submarines were being lost at a rate never seen before. The British had succeeded in creating something German researchers had considered unattainable. A compact and highly powerful microwave radar unit capable of being installed on aircraft and naval vessels, giving Allied forces detection abilities that Germany could not counter or match. The path from uncertainty to understanding had actually begun months earlier in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. During late 1942 and early 1943, U-boat crews had reported a growing number of troubling encounters with Allied aircraft that seemed able to discover them with unexplainable precision. Captain Lieutenant Hans Joachim Schwantke of U-43 submitted a report in December 1942 that captured the situation. While crossing the Bay of Biscay on a moonless night and operating on the surface to recharge batteries, his crew was suddenly illuminated by lights from directly above. Their MTOX radar detector had remained silent, and they had heard no approaching aircraft. Explosive charges then fell around the submarine, damaging the vessel so severely that it had to return to port under emergency conditions. In his diary, he wrote that they were effectively blind. The detector gave no warning. The aircraft seemed to appear out of total darkness. According to his account, only chance saved the boat. They heard the fall of the ordnance and managed to submerge with almost no time left. The detector should have alerted them well before the attack, allowing a safe dive. Instead, there had been no signal at all. He noted that either the British had created a radar system beyond the reach of German detectors, or they were using methods that remained unknown. In either case, they were being targeted by adversaries who were impossible to locate until the attack was already underway. Similar messages reached U-boat command in Paris throughout the winter. Submarines were being found on the surface at night without any warning. Aircraft appeared able to detect them through conditions that should have offered concealment. The MTOX detectors, which had once alerted crews to older ASV Mark II radar systems operating at 1.5 meters wavelengths, were now proving unreliable because captains continued to depend on them for early notice. The numbers revealed a steady decline that would turn disastrous by spring. In November 1942, German U-boats sank about 119 merchant ships totaling 729,000 tons worldwide. While 13 submarines were lost, December recorded 60 merchant ships totaling 330,000 tons sunk, with 5 U-boats lost. By January 1943, sinkings fell to 37 ships, as U-boat losses rose to 7. February saw 34 merchant ships sunk and 17 U-boats lost. The exchange that had once favored Germany was collapsing with increasing speed. Admiral Karl Donitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the entire Navy on January 30th, 1943, while still directing U-boat operations through his staff, followed these figures with deep concern. His headquarters kept detailed plots of every U-boat position, every convoy route, every engagement. The patterns that emerged defied normal naval logic. U-boats closing on convoys at night were intercepted before striking. Boats crossing the Bay of Biscay under darkness were bombed with striking accuracy. Submarines running submerged by day were somehow tracked and attacked. Allied aircraft seemed able to find submarines in conditions where visual sighting should not be possible. Weather during many attacks ruled out seeing by eye, yet the strikes arrived with exact precision. Corvette and Captain Gar Hessler, Donitz's son-in-law who had married his daughter Ursula in November 1937, served as first staff officer at U-boat headquarters. Hessler spent weeks reviewing combat reports to find a cause for the mounting losses. The trend was clear but baffling. Allied detection capacity had jumped within a short span between late 1942 and early 1943, pointing to new technology rather than only better tactics or training. But what system could see through darkness, cloud, and fog? What could pick up a small conning tower from long range? What could follow a periscope wake or snorkel exhaust when human watchers would see nothing? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Donitz called urgent meetings with leading German scientists and engineers. Through January and February 1943, the talks exposed gaps in knowledge about Allied systems and a risky confidence in German superiority. Radar specialists argued that no set could work well at wavelengths shorter than about 50 centimeters because of limits in power generation. Available vacuum tube technology, they asserted, could not produce enough power at higher frequencies to make shorter wavelength radar useful in war. The MTOX detectors, built to pick up Allied radar at 1.5 meters wavelength, should in theory warn of any radar-equipped aircraft. Yet warnings were now failing. Something in Allied capability had changed. But what? Some scientists proposed infrared detection that sensed heat from diesel exhaust. Others raised acoustic methods, though ranges seemed unlikely. A few mentioned the theoretical use of centimetric radar driven by advanced magnetron devices, but this idea was set aside as impractical. German work on such sets had concluded there was no tactical gain worth the cost. The British could not have solved problems that had stopped German engineering, experts told Donitz. German science was the finest available. If German studies judged centimetric radar impractical, it must be so. The Allies must be using some different approach, perhaps several methods used together. The belief that Britain, strained by years of bombing and operating under constant industrial pressure, could have produced radar technology more advanced than anything in German hands seemed unthinkable to many specialists. That confidence collapsed once Runger's group at Telefunken began studying the device recovered near Rotterdam. The magnetron reached Berlin on February 5, 1943, along with photographs of the full H2S system and detailed notes from the crash site. Runger brought together Germany's leading microwave experts to form what became known as the Rotterdam Working Group, or Arbeiteinschaft Rotterdam. Their assignment was to determine exactly what the device was, how it operated, and most importantly, what advantages it provided to the Allied forces. The group's first meeting was held on February 22nd or 23rd in Telefunken's Berlin offices. The initial examination on February 6th identified the basic operating method of the magnetron. Very soon, they recognized that the cylindrical cavities functioned as resonant chambers that generated and amplified electromagnetic oscillations, while electrons moved through the magnetic field produced by the permanent magnets. In concept, it resembled earlier splitter-node magnetron designs that German teams had tested in the 1930 seconds. But here, it had been built with a level of precision that stunned the investigators. Dr. Otto Hackenberg, a young physicist responsible for documenting the evaluation, later described the moment in post-war interviews. When they first powered the magnetron using laboratory supplies, the frequency meter registered 3 gigahertzes, a level they could barely measure and certainly could not generate with practical power. Output readings indicated 40 kilowatts of peak power. Hackenberg compared it to discovering that the opposing side had artillery in a conflict where both sides believed only rifles existed. They understood immediately why the MTOX detector had failed. It was designed to sense radar signals in the meter wavelength range around 1.5 meters or 200 megahertzes. The captured device operated at a 1 centimeter wavelength, which was more than 16 times shorter. Their detectors could not sense this radiation at all. The Allies were using a section of the electromagnetic spectrum completely beyond the reach of German warning systems. German forces had been fighting without understanding that the enemy could observe them clearly while they remained unaware. Runger's team continued working without pause for 2 weeks, reconstructing the entire H2S system from the wreckage and the retrieved components. The magnetron powered a rotating antenna that scanned a 360 degrees field below the aircraft. Reflected signals appeared on a plan position indicator cathode ray display, forming a map-like image that revealed coastlines, cities, rivers, and major ground features with impressive accuracy. For the first time, bomber crews had the ability to navigate and identify targets in complete darkness or through heavy cloud layers. The system had been developed mainly for navigation in strategic bombing, enabling Pathfinder aircraft to mark targets for following bomber groups regardless of weather. British bombers could now operate against Germany under conditions that previously offered natural concealment. Yet the consequences for submarine warfare were even more significant. Using the same CavityMagnetron design for air-to-surface search radar, designated ASV Mark III, an aircraft could detect the conning tower of a submarine from about 20 miles away, in any weather, day or night. The small radar cross-section that had protected submarines from earlier radar did not matter against this high-frequency centimetric system. Even more damaging was the fact that these microwave signals could not be detected by German radar warning receivers. All German equipment, including the MTOX set relied on by U-boats, operated in the meter wavelength band. The MTOX could detect signals between 1, 3, and 2, 6 meters, which covered the frequencies used by ASV Mark II radar through 1,942. But the new centimetric radar used a 1 centimeter wavelength, a frequency 17 times higher than anything German receivers could sense. Submarines were moving directly into danger without realizing their defensive tools no longer functioned. The technological shock was complete and severe. On February 23, 1943, the Rotterdam Working Group delivered its findings to senior German military and industrial leaders. Although surviving documentation does not confirm that Reich Marshal Hermann Göring or Admiral Dönitz personally attended the meeting, both were briefed on the results. Representatives from major German electronics companies were present, including engineers from Telefunken, Siemens, AEG, and Lorenz. Senior Luftwaffe communications officers and naval technical experts filled the meeting room. The atmosphere was serious. Runge opened his report with a statement recorded in the minutes and later examined by Allied investigators after the war. He explained that the British had achieved a technological advance of exceptional importance. The CavityMagnetron represented progress in microwave generation that placed Germany at least 3 years behind under normal development rates. More importantly, it enabled radar detection systems for which Germany had no countermeasures and no defenses. The briefing set out the CV-64 magnetron in precise terms. It used 8 resonant cavities cut into a copper block, operated at a frequency of 3 GHz with a wavelength of 1 centimeter, produced a peak output of 40 kilowatts, and was compact enough for aircraft use while rugged enough for combat. The finish and consistency showed a mature manufacturing line rather than a trial piece. The operational meaning was stark. If Britain could build these in numbers, then Allied aircraft and ships could carry radar that Germany could not counter. The MTO warning receivers offered no help. Germany's meter-band radar network would slide toward obsolescence. Night fighters, anti-aircraft defenses, and naval units all depended on systems the British had now surpassed by a full generation. When Göring was briefed, possibly during a demonstration of the reassembled H-2S set at the Humboldt Flak Tower in Berlin, his response was one of clear alarm. The leader who had once claimed enemy bombers would never strike. Germany now faced proof that British crews could navigate and bomb in any weather, using tools Germany could not equal. Dönitz, informed through staff channels, grasped the stakes at once. His U-boat arm had lost 39 submarines in the first 2 months of 1943, with 7 in January and 17 inches February, and further losses in December, bringing the recent total to 39 over 3 months. If this pace held, the campaign would fail within a short time. Captain Zur Eberhardgott, serving as Dönitz's operations chief and advanced to admiral in March 1943, kept a rigorous statistical record of U-boat activity. The figures grew worse by the week. Losses in the first quarter outpaced replacements, even with yards delivering about 20 to 24 boats each month. More serious still, veteran crews were vanishing faster than training could replace them. Those present agreed on several hard conclusions that were written into classified summaries later seized by Allied forces. First, Germany could not field the CavityMagnetron in useful quantities before 1944 at the earliest. The exact machining of the cavities, the need for specific copper materials, the strong permanent magnets that relied on cobalt in short supply, and the necessary production skills were beyond immediate reach. Even an emergency program would require months just to set up the lines. Second, workable countermeasures would take at least 6 months. A new class of radar warning receivers tuned to centimetric bands could in theory be designed, but building and fitting them across the U-boat force would run well into 1944. The task of detecting emissions at 3 GHz was technically demanding, given Germany's limited hands-on experience with microwave systems. Third, and most serious, the British almost certainly possessed other versions of this technology beyond the unit recovered. The Rotterdam set worked at 9.1 centimetre. Allied laboratories had likely built, or were building, 3 centimetre systems that would make any new German countermeasure obsolete before it reached the front. The contest in technology was not only behind schedule, but could not be won within the remaining wartime window given the Allied lead and greater industrial strength. Dönitz received these reports with a growing sense of what threatened his force. His U-boat headquarters moved to the Paris region in March 1942 after the Saint-Nazaire raid revealed the weakness of the former Laurent site, kept careful records of every action, every loss, and every shift in tactics. The wall charts in the operations room conveyed the situation more clearly than tables of figures. Red markers for U-boat positions thinned across the North Atlantic. Blue markers for Allied convoys seemed to pass through zones where wolf packs should have made contact. Black markers for U-boat losses gathered along the Bay of Biscay transit lanes and in patrol areas where aircraft coverage was common. "We have been fighting blind," Dönitz told his senior officers after the Rotterdam analysis. "Every advantage we counted on had been stripped away by Allied methods we had not known existed. Night attacks offered no safety when the enemy could see in complete darkness. The vast Atlantic offered no shelter when radar could pick up a conning tower from 20 meters in any weather. Our radar warning sets gave us false confidence while failing to protect us from the new threat." The problem before Dönitz was direct and urgent. While industry rushed toward countermeasures that might not appear until 1944, Hessler recommended immediate changes in practice. All commanders would be warned that radar warning sets could not be trusted for timely alerts. Boats would remain submerged whenever possible, surfacing only to charge batteries or when higher speed was essential. Anti-aircraft weapons would be added across the fleet, though everyone understood this was a last resort against aircraft that could locate a boat long before the crew could see the attacker. Most important, Dönitz and his staff began to consider that the Atlantic campaign might soon be impossible to sustain. If current loss rates held while Allied shipbuilding continued to grow, the arithmetic would break against Germany. The war of tonnage would be lost, with merchant shipping replaced faster than U-boats could sink it. March 1943 marked both the high point and the turning point for the U-boat arm. The largest convoy clashes of the war came that month, as wolf packs of 30 to 40 boats tried to crush defenses by weight of numbers. For a short time, the approach appeared to succeed despite the Allied edge in technology. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, traveling together in mid-March, were attacked by about 40 boats from 3 wolf packs. The fighting lasted from March 16 to the 20th of March 1943. 21 merchant ships totaling 141,000 tons were sunk, the highest total from any single convoy battle of the war. The British Admiralty circulated an internal view that Germany had never been closer to cutting Britain's Atlantic lifeline, but the price for Germany could not be borne. The boats hitting these convoys lost one confirmed submarine, U-384, with several others damaged. The wider March results showed between 12 and 15 U-boats destroyed depending on counting rules, with many losses outside the main convoy actions. The totals could not be ignored. Even when U-boats scored tactical results against merchant shipping, the overall position was worsening. Allied shipyards, led by the fast-growing American program, were turning out new merchants faster than U-boats could destroy them. The Liberty ship program had cut building time from more than 200 days in 1941 to an average of 42 days by 1944. Although record achievements such as the SS Robert E. Peary, completed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes in November 1942, were exceptional milestones rather than typical output, the overall pace remained extraordinary. At peak production, American yards were launching about 3 Liberty ships every 2 days, roughly 1 sink ships per day. German U-boats, which on average sank between 3,000 and 5,000 tons before being lost, could not keep pace with this output. As long as Allied industry replaced shipping faster than U-boats could destroy it, the campaign became a strategic defeat hidden behind individual tactical successes. The true breaking point arrived in May 1943, the month later remembered by U-boat crews as Black May. Throughout this period, Allied aircraft and escorts equipped with centimetric ASV Mark III radar and Type 271 ship radar inflicted unprecedented losses on the U-boat fleet. The convoy battle for ONS-5 in late April and early May marked the shift. This slow convoy of 43 merchant vessels, guarded by 16 escorts, came under attack by about 30 U-boats. The Germans sank 12 to 13 merchant ships, but in turn lost 6 to 7 submarines, with another 5 to 7 heavily damaged. For the first time in a major convoy battle, U-boat losses approached their successes. The exchange could not be sustained. 2 weeks later, convoy SC-133 showed complete Allied superiority. Of the 37 to 38 merchant ships in the convoy, none were lost, despite attacks by 25 to 33 U-boats from 3 patrol lines. The Germans lost 3 to 5 submarines, including U-954. This battle marked the final major convoy of 1,943 that faced genuine danger. Throughout May, losses continued without pause. On May 4, U-209 was sunk in the North Atlantic with all 46 men lost. On May 5, U-447 and U-663 were destroyed. On May 6, U-465 and U-563 were sunk. On May 11, U-89, U-86 and U-456 were lost. On May 12, U-528 was destroyed with all hands. On May 15, U-176 was sunk. On May 19, U-273 and U-954 were lost. The sinking of U-954 on the 19th of May 1943 carried personal weight for Admiral Donitz. The Type 70C U-boat, under Captain Lieutenant Odo Lowe, included among its crew Lieutenant Zur C. Peter Donitz, the Admiral's youngest son serving as watch officer. The submarine was attacking convoy SC-130 when detected by the River-class frigate HMS Jed and the B-class sloop HMS Senon. The British ships attacked using Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges. The Hedgehog, introduced in 1942, marked a major improvement over standard depth charges. Its projectiles exploded only on contact, meaning that any detonation confirmed a direct hit rather than simply disturbing the water and masking sonar readings. U-954 was destroyed, with all 47 crew killed at position 54. 54 north, 34. 19 west. The loss was reported to Donitz by secure telegraph. U-954 attacked and sunk by British escorts HMS Jed and Senon. Hedgehog weapons achieved direct hit. No survivors. Your son is gone. Donitz did not stop operations or take leave. He believed there would be time for personal grief after the war if Germany survived. For the moment, he remained responsible for the roughly 40,000 submariners still under his command. The loss of his son, as profound as it was, could not interrupt operational duties at a time when the U-boat campaign was nearing collapse. By the 22nd of May 1943, the operational U-boat force had lost between 41 and 43 submarines during the month, depending on classification. U-boat.net lists 42 boats lost with 1,065 men killed and 1,837 survivors. Other records cite 41 combat losses, or 43, including boats removed from service. No matter the precise figure, the losses equaled roughly 25% of the operational U-boat fleet, rendering the month unsustainable for German naval operations. Donitz called his operations staff into an emergency meeting on May 24th. 1943. The Situation Board showed a crisis without precedent in U-boat history. 1/4 of the operational fleet lost in 3 weeks, casualty rates higher than any previous period, seasoned commanders dying faster than training centers could replace them, and newly built submarines being destroyed on their first patrols before their crews gained survival experience. The youngest officers, the men expected to lead the force in 1944 and 1945, were dying in the Atlantic at 23 and 24 years old, their futures erased. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz issued the hardest order of his career. He drafted the directive that signaled effective withdrawal from the Battle of the Atlantic. To all U-boats at sea, due to superiority of enemy detection equipment and overwhelming air coverage, North Atlantic operations are temporarily suspended, effective immediately. All boats now in the North Atlantic will withdraw to positions southwest of the Azores. Boats heading to operational areas will return to Biscay ports. Further action will depend on improved detection equipment and stronger anti-aircraft defenses. We have not surrendered. We have accepted reality. The immediate results appeared in the shipping reports. In June 1943, only 17 merchant ships were sunk in the Atlantic. In July, only 9. The Allied supply line, which had seemed close to breaking in March, became secure. The large convoys that would support D-Day and the liberation of Europe began forming in American ports, shielded by technology that had reduced Germany's once deadly weapon to irrelevance. Yet the human cost within the U-boat arm continued through the rest of the war. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served aboard submarines, about 30,000 died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any major military branch in the conflict. They died when hulls collapsed under pressure. They died when air systems failed during long-depth charge attacks. They died in fires when fuel ignited. They died from exposure in the cold Atlantic or from heat in tropical waters when forced to remain submerged for long periods. They died knowing their equipment was outmatched, their missions increasingly hopeless, and their sacrifices unable to change the war's outcome. They kept fighting because responsibility required it, and because withdrawing would allow Allied naval and air units to shift elsewhere, bringing defeat even faster. Interrogation reports from captured crews during the summer and fall of 1943 showed the deep psychological effects of this technological imbalance. Allied intelligence officers, at first puzzled by the pessimism of prisoners who had been confident of German victory only months earlier, came to understand they were seeing something different. These men had not been defeated in a typical battle. They had been overtaken by science, hunted by systems they could not detect or resist. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hennicke, commanding U-515, achieved notable success during his service, sinking several merchant ships and earning the Knight's Cross. His submarine was sunk on April 9, 1944, by U.S. Task Group 22-3, which included the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and its destroyer escorts. About 40 crew members were captured, including Hennicke. During interrogation at Fort Hunt, Virginia, officially designated P.O. Box 1142, he provided detailed statements that remained classified until 1985. When released decades later, the transcripts revealed the severe demoralization produced by Allied radar superiority and offered important insight into how German crews understood their technological disadvantage. We understood by the middle of 1943 that the war could not be won, Henke told his interrogators during sessions from May 3 to June 15, 1944. Not because German sailors lacked courage or training, but because Allied technology was eliminating every advantage we once relied on. The MTOX detector was useless against the newer radar. Among the crews we called it the grave bell, because when it failed to warn of aircraft, it meant only that our time had come. Newer systems that could detect centimetric radar arrived too late for most submarines. The Knakos device, introduced in September 1943, could in theory detect the new signals. But even when it worked, we could sense the emissions only at close range while Allied aircraft found us from beyond sight. We could dive when we had warning, but aircraft would remain overhead and call in surface ships to hunt us. We could not escape what we could not detect until the attack had already begun. Henke's interrogation took a darker turn when he was wrongly accused of war crimes related to survivors from the SS Ceramic, A passenger liner sunk by U-515 inches, December 1942. Threatened with being sent to Britain to face trial, he became increasingly distressed. On June 15, 1944, he attempted to escape by climbing the perimeter fence at Fort Hunt. Guards shot and killed him, making him the only prisoner who attempted escape from the facility during the war. Oberleutnant Zur C. Herbert Werner survived the conflict, after serving on 5 U-boats, including surviving the sinking of U-612 inches, August 1942, and U-415 inches, July 1944. His post-war memoir, Iron Coffins, first published in 1969, became one of the most widely read accounts of the U-boat war from the German viewpoint. Werner described the mental strain of facing superior Allied technology. Every patrol after May 1943 was a survival test that pretended to be a military mission. We knew Allied radar could detect our periscope wake, our snorkel exhaust, even the top of the conning tower when it barely broke the surface. We stayed submerged far longer than our boats were designed to endure, breathing stale air, saving battery power, surfacing only when fuel and oxygen forced us to. The Atlantic, which we had ruled in 1942, turned into an enemy more dangerous than Allied destroyers. It hid aircraft above fog and ships beyond the horizon, while exposing our movements to opponents whose technology gave them complete tactical control. We were being hunted by forces we could not sense until the attack was already underway. Corvette Captain Peter Erich Kremer, who led U-333 through multiple successful patrols, survived the war as one of only 3 senior U-boat commanders to do so. His memoir, U-Boat Commander, a periscope view of the Battle of the Atlantic, published by the Naval Institute Press in 1984, offered another view of the technological shift that defeated the U-boat fleet. Kremer described a patrol in June 1943, shortly after the withdrawal from the North Atlantic. We were ordered to patrol off the African coast, looking for isolated ships away from the heavy air coverage. Even there, Allied aircraft appeared far more often than seemed possible in such vast waters. One afternoon, we detected an aircraft at long range with our new Wannsee radar warning set. I ordered an immediate dive to 150 meters and went to silent running. We remained submerged for 6 hours, far beyond what was safe. When we surfaced to snorkel, the same aircraft or another one appeared again within minutes, forcing us down. This continued for 14 hours, until our batteries were nearly empty. We had to surface or suffocate. When we finally broached the surface, the aircraft was already waiting, positioned exactly for an attack. Only frantic anti-aircraft fire and a crash dive that nearly crushed the pressure hull saved us. We never fired a torpedo that patrol. We spent 3 weeks trying to avoid detection long enough to attack any target at all. Allied control of technology was so strong that we could barely perform our basic mission. Technical studies continued through 1943 and 1944 as German engineers raced to create countermeasures. They produced the LMS-10 Magnetron, a direct copy of the British CV-64, with at least 4 units completed by May 1943. But production was limited by shortages of key materials, especially cobalt needed for the permanent magnets. Many of the first units required magnets taken from captured aircraft, making mass production impossible. Telefunken attempted to design a German-made magnetron called LMS-12, modifying the British concept to suit available materials. But this version did not reach even small-scale production until April 1944, far too late to influence the outcome of the war. By that point, the Battle of the Atlantic had effectively been lost for nearly a year. Total German production of CavityMagnetrons across all variants reached only several hundred units before the war ended, with most estimates placing the total below 1,000. This stood in sharp contrast to Allied output, which reached into the tens of thousands. Exact German figures for 1943 remain uncertain, but the imbalance in industrial resources and raw materials ensured Germany could never hope to equal Allied production. Radar warning receivers capable of detecting centimetric frequencies were developed in parallel. The CHRONICLES system, identified as Fugi 350 CHRONICLES for aircraft and FMBB-7 CHRONICLES-U for U-boats, entered service in September 1943. In theory, it could alert U-boats to aircraft using ASV Mark III radar operating at a 1 centimeter wavelength. But by the time CHRONICLES reached operational boats, Allied scientists had already fielded 3 centimeters radar systems that made CHRONICLES ineffective. The H-2X radar used by American forces and advanced forms of H-2S operated at 3 centimeters wavelength, requiring entirely new receivers. German efforts constantly lagged behind, always countering older systems, while new Allied technology overtook them, before German countermeasures could be widely installed. A Junkers Ju-88 night fighter fitted with CHRONICLES equipment did land at an RAF base, though not in November 1943 as sometimes stated. On July 13, 1944, a Ju-88 G1 landed at RAF Woodbridge, carrying Fugi 350, CHRONICLES, Fensburg homing gear, and Liechtenstein SN-2 radar. The crew had become lost and believed they were landing at a German field. British intelligence immediately examined the aircraft, gaining valuable insight into German countermeasure development. Their inspection showed that German engineering remained advanced and that CHRONICLES functioned as intended, but it was entirely defensive. It could warn of Allied radar but offered no offensive benefit. More importantly, it could detect only the 1 centimeter signals of early centimetric radar, not the 3 centimeters sets already spreading through Allied units. The German Navy also attempted tactical changes to address Allied radar superiority. U-boats were outfitted with stronger anti-aircraft weapons, and some were converted into flak boats with quad 20mm mounts and heavy gun armament. The idea was that if radar made hiding impossible, U-boats should stay surfaced and fight back. In practice, this failed completely. Allied aircraft could detect submarines at ranges far beyond effective anti-aircraft fire. Aircraft could approach from any direction, and often from the sun or clouds, giving crews only seconds to react. Aircraft speed allowed them to dictate the engagement, while a surfaced submarine remained nearly stationary. Radio calls from aircraft brought in additional units, including surface escorts that could destroy a U-boat caught on the surface. The flak boat concept cost more submarines than it downed aircraft, becoming another unsuccessful attempt to solve a technological problem with tactics. Acoustic homing torpedoes, codenamed Zonkonig and designated G7ES or T5, were introduced in September 1943 to counter convoy escorts. The first 80 torpedoes were delivered on August 1, 1943, and were used in large numbers against convoys ONS-18 and ON-202 in late September. These torpedoes tracked the propeller sounds of escort ships, theoretically allowing U-boats to eliminate escorts before attacking merchant vessels. Initial results were encouraging, with several escorts damaged or sunk, but Allied forces quickly devised countermeasures, including the Foxer noisemaker towed behind ships to lure the torpedoes away. More importantly, acoustic torpedoes did not solve the basic problem. U-boats could not reach convoys. If Allied radar detected them before they could approach, acoustic torpedoes offered no real advantage. New submarine designs with snorkel equipment were another attempt to adapt to Allied radar. The snorkel, first created by the Dutch in 1938 and captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940, was initially overlooked. German engineers began trials on U-58 inches Summer 1943, with operational use beginning in early 1944. The snorkel allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, charging batteries and moving without surfacing. This reduced exposure to radar, but snorkels had serious drawbacks. They produced a wake visible to radar, especially in calm seas. They limited speed to only a few knots. They required skilled handling in rough seas, as waves closing over the snorkel head triggered automatic valves that briefly cut off air, causing dangerous pressure changes inside the submarine. By mid-1944, About half of the U-boats operating from French ports carried snorkels. Although they improved survival somewhat, they could not change the strategic picture. Snorkel-equipped boats could avoid some attacks, but they could not sink enough ships to alter Allied logistics. The outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic was already decided. The Type 21 Electroboot became Germany's most ambitious attempt to regain technological parity. This new design featured a streamlined hull, 3 times the battery capacity of earlier boats, a submerged speed of 17, 2 knots compared to 7, 6 knots for the Type 7, 6 bow torpedo tubes with hydraulic reload, allowing 18 torpedoes to be fired in under 20 minutes, and advanced sonar systems. The Type 21 could, in theory, outrun most surface escorts while submerged and remain underwater for long periods. If this design had entered service in 1943, instead of 1945, it might have extended the Battle of the Atlantic, but rushed production caused severe quality issues. Of the 118 boats built, only 4 reached full combat readiness before the war ended. Only 2 went on patrol in April and May, 1945, achieving no sinkings before Germany's surrender. The final U-boat patrol of the war showed both the promise and the futility of Germany's late technological efforts. U-2511, the first Type 21 Electroboat to reach operational status, sailed on April 30th, 1945, under Corvette Captain Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most skilled and successful U-boat commanders. Schnee's patrol revealed the impressive capabilities of the Type 21. On May 4th, 1945, U-2511 detected a British cruiser group and carried out a flawless attack approach, reaching firing position without being discovered, even though Allied radar covered the area. The boat's increased submerged speed and quiet operating qualities enabled it to close in without detection. Schnee did not launch torpedoes. Germany had already begun surrender negotiations. He surfaced and transmitted his position on May 5th, 1945, ending the U-boat campaign not through combat, but through acceptance of defeat. In his post-war writing, Schnee reflected on the irony of the moment. He stated that the patrol proved what the Type 21 might have accomplished had it been available a year earlier. But such demonstrations meant nothing. The Allies had already gained victory through industrial strength and technological advances introduced in 1942 and 1943. Germany's most advanced submarine arrived only after the war was effectively finished. The statistical record of the Battle of the Atlantic confirms the decisive effect of CavityMagnetron radar, beginning in early 1943. From January through May 1943, during the initial introduction of ASV Mark III radar, but before full deployment, U-boats sank 245 merchant ships, totaling about 1,289,000 tons. German losses in this period reached 95 U-boats, including the devastating 41 to 43 boats lost in May alone. From June 1943 through May 1944, after centimetric radar became standard on most Allied aircraft and ships in the Atlantic, merchant ship losses fell to 185 ships, totaling about 819,000 tons, even though more U-boats were at sea. German losses climbed to 237 submarines. The balance had completely shifted. In March 1943, the height of U-boat success, Germany sank 82 merchant ships totaling 476,000 tons in the Atlantic, and 120 ships worldwide totaling 693,000 tons, while losing DOS-O boats. By summer 1943, after centimetric radar became widely used, monthly sinkings dropped below 20 ships, while U-boat losses stayed in double figures. The tonnage war could no longer be won. The convoy battles of May 1943 were Germany's last opportunity to achieve strategic victory in the Atlantic. The study of the Rotterdam device in February 1943 confirmed what many German leaders feared but hoped was untrue. Allied technology had advanced far beyond German expectations. giving detection capabilities that no level of skill or bravery could overcome. Post-war analysis of captured U-boats by Allied engineers uncovered desperate German efforts to resist radar superiority. Some boats had been coated with experimental radar-absorbing material, crude early attempts at stealth that added weight, reduced speed, and produced almost no reduction in radar reflection. The materials available to Germany in 1943 and 1944 could not absorb centimetric radar effectively. Other boats carried inflatable decoy balloons meant to create false radar images. These sometimes functioned but could not be used underwater or in rough seas, which limited their usefulness. Still others had modified exhaust systems designed to reduce the radar visibility of snorkel emissions, but the changes reduced diesel efficiency and did not prevent radar detection. Each of these efforts reflected German engineering skill applied to a challenge that could not be solved. Mechanical solutions could not defeat electromagnetic waves. The technology was unforgiving. Allied radar worked at wavelengths and power levels that revealed submarines regardless of darkness, clouds, or evasive tactics. Remaining fully submerged was the only real protection. But battery systems in 1943 and 1944 could not sustain the long underwater endurance required for true radar avoidance. German submarines were trapped by the limits of their own equipment. They were visible to foes they could not see, pursued by weapons they could not counter, and forced to operate in an electromagnetic arena where the Allies held full control. The psychological records left by German naval personnel may be the clearest proof of the CavityMagnetron's war-winning effect. These were not defeated men reaching for excuses. They were trained technical professionals who understood precisely what had failed. Their statements in interrogation files, private letters, and later memoirs point not to tactical mistakes or poor seamanship, but to a core problem of outdated technology. They described the frustration of fighting opponents with better detection tools while German crews remained effectively blind. They explained the fatalism that spread among boats whose crews knew discovery was only a matter of time, and survival depended more on luck than on skill. They charted the shift from confident hunters to hunted targets, a change driven not by a single battle, but by a technical discovery. When Obstitel Wilhelm Runge studied the Rotterdam device in February 1943, he was in effect performing an autopsy on German naval planning. The copper unit on his bench explained each unexplained loss, each sudden night interception, and each convoy action where Allied forces seemed to know U-boat positions before attacks could form. The CavityMagnetron showed that Germany had fought the Atlantic campaign deaf and blind to the part of the spectrum the Allies were using with crushing effect. That realization, more than a single defeat at sea, broke German faith in technical superiority and in the chance of a strategic win. It convinced senior leaders that Allied science had moved beyond German expectations, not only in radar but possibly in other areas as well. If Britain had created a new radar system in secret while under heavy bombing, commanders asked what else might be coming. This change in confidence altered defenses and redirected scarce resources toward counter-weapon programs that arrived too late to matter. Intelligence reviews after Rotterdam became more cautious, written with the assumption that the enemy might hold tools not yet known to Germany. By autumn 1943, production centimetric radar sets were on hundreds of aircraft and ships. Type 271 naval radar, using a CavityMagnetron, was fitted to convoy escorts beginning in 1941 and could detect a surfaced submarine at up to 20 kilometers and a periscope at about 900 yards. It worked at 7 centimeters, with roughly 70 kilowatts. Peak power. ASV Mark III airborne radar reached RAF Coastal Command in March 1943, allowing patrols over vast sea areas and detection of U-boats regardless of visibility. The American H-2X set, a development of H-2S at 3 centimeters, gave bomber crews navigation and aiming ability that made weather and darkness largely irrelevant to strategic operations. All of these systems traced back to the same CavityMagnetron that Runge evaluated in February 1943. The Rotterdam find became the key to Allied control of the electromagnetic domain across the Atlantic War. German efforts to answer this edge consumed major resources for little gain. The Knakos warning receiver program pulled skilled people and factory space that could have supported offensive projects or other defenses. U-boat construction shifted toward designs focused on underwater performance, which reduced output of standard boats that might have been useful in secondary seas against opponents with fewer technical assets. Research branches examined unusual ideas such as underwater television, large passive sonar arrays, and hydrogen peroxide drives. None reached service before the end of the war. Each effort showed German engineering skill, but each chased problems created by Allied technology that advanced faster than German countermeasures could be fielded. The final record of the Battle of the Atlantic tells a story in which industrial strength and technological progress outweighed tactical ability and personal bravery. Germany commissioned about 1,181 U-boats during the war. Of these, 785 were lost, with 648 destroyed by enemy action, and the rest scuttled, lost through accidents, or removed from service. Only 156 remained to surrender in May 1945. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served aboard U-boats, about 30,000 were killed, a casualty rate of 75%. It was the highest loss rate suffered by any major military branch on either side. These men fought with skill and determination, but neither courage nor training could overcome the technological disadvantage created by Allied radar. The CavityMagnetron, invented at Birmingham University in 1939 to 1940 and refined for military use by Geck, became one of the most important technological achievements of the war. Its influence extended far past its wartime role. The microwave engineering developed for radar formed the basis for post-war communication networks, television broadcasting, satellite links, and eventually the microwave ovens used in homes around the world. The manufacturing expertise developed to build magnetrons helped create the electronics expansion of the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. The Anglo-American cooperation shown during the Tizard mission in 1940, when Britain shared magnetron technology with the United States, established a long-lasting pattern of scientific collaboration that continued through the Cold War and beyond. The choice to use a breakthrough technology despite the risk of enemy capture shaped military policy for decades. The CavityMagnetron showed that the operational advantage gained from advanced systems outweighed the dangers. As long as production capacity could deliver the technology in quantities the enemy could not replicate. This principle guided Western military development through the jet era, the nuclear era, and into the information age. For the German U-boat force, the story closed with surrender and scuttling. On May 4, 1945, Grand Admiral Dönitz, who had become head of state after Hitler's death on April 30th, ordered all U-boats to end offensive operations. On May 8th, after Germany's unconditional surrender, Operation Deadlight began. All U-boats still at sea were told to surface, fly black flags, and proceed to assigned Allied ports. Many commanders chose to scuttle their vessels instead, unwilling to hand over the boats in which so many of their men had died. The order to scuttle, echoing the destruction of the German high seas fleet at Scapa Flow in 1919, led to more than 200 U-boats being deliberately sunk by their own crews. The men who served in those submarines, both the 75% who died and the 25% who survived, fought a campaign determined not by tactics or bravery, but by science and engineering. They were defeated by electromagnetic energy generated by a copper device built in British factories, installed in Allied aircraft and ships, and produced in quantities German industry could not hope to equal given shortages of materials, heavy bombing, and limited industrial capacity. The examination of a single recovered radar unit in February 1943 had revealed the truth behind their losses, exposing an electromagnetic battlefield in which Germany had been blind while the Allies saw clearly. The statistical record and the technical evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The CavityMagnetron shifted the Battle of the Atlantic more decisively than any tactical or strategic choice. When Allied scientists reflected on the magnetron's influence after the war, they often repeated a remark attributed to American physicist Luis Alvarez, who contributed to radar development at MIT's radiation laboratory. The CavityMagnetron, Alvarez reportedly said, won the Battle of the Atlantic, the air war over Germany, and ultimately the war itself. Although the statement simplified a complex history with many contributing factors, the technical record strongly supported the central idea. Without centimetric radar, Allied convoy losses in 1943 and early 1944 would likely have remained unsustainable. Without radar-equipped aircraft, U-boats would have continued to operate freely in regions beyond the reach of land-based air patrols. Without the detection advantage provided by magnetron technology, the build-up for D-Day would have been vulnerable to submarine attacks on the vast flow of supplies required for the Normandy invasion. The magnetron, born from basic research on microwave physics at Birmingham University and produced in tens of thousands of units in American and British factories, was deployed widely enough to provide continuous coverage across critical ocean regions. It created an electromagnetic advantage that tightened steadily around German naval forces until they could no longer operate with effectiveness. The examination at Telefunken headquarters in February 1943 had been an autopsy rather than a diagnosis. By the time German scientists realized what Allied technology had already accomplished, the strategic result was settled. In the end, the story of the Rotterdam device goes beyond the details of radar engineering or submarine warfare. It represents the decisive power of advanced technology when produced at industrial scale and used against opponents without the scientific foundation, production, strength, or material resources to equal it. It shows the psychological burden of fighting an enemy with capabilities you cannot match, turning confident combatants into hunted targets once technological inferiority becomes clear. Most importantly, it demonstrates how a copper block 8 centimeters across, cut with 8 resonant cavities around a central cathode, altered the course of history by making the unseen visible and the hidden exposed. The German admirals and scientists who studied the captured radar understood perhaps more deeply than anyone else in the Third Reich that they were witnessing not only Allied scientific achievement, but the mechanism of German defeat. The calculations could not be disputed, the physics allowed no escape, and the strategic consequences were unavoidable. They returned from Berlin to their operational posts, carrying the knowledge that their best submarines and bravest crews could not overcome the electromagnetic advantage created by Allied science and delivered by Allied industry. In overwhelming numbers, they continued the fight because their duty required it and because hope fades slowly. But they understood. The study of a single recovered device had revealed the future before it arrived.